Thank you very much, Christine. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. It's a pleasure to hear your remarks. I've been invited here to come and share some of the understanding we have of the connection between the movement of goods and the health of the public related to air pollution. But I would like to begin by sharing with you that my journey here perhaps began as early as 1985 when I was able, as a merchant mariner cadet, to sail into this harbor in training. And the movement of goods by shipping is a very, very long tradition. And it's a tradition in which most of the years that ships have plied the ocean, they've been, the sailors, the men and women who have sailed those vessels and moved the goods, have had to pay attention to two duties. A duty to commerce and the people whose cargoes they had under their care, and a duty to the environment, at least until the last century, when the environment, paying attention and giving duty to the environment, was a matter of your own survival as a sailor. Now with technologies, we've been able to move more goods more safely, despite storms, despite other sorts of changes, and we've improved our safety. But this time, your remarks, Mr. Secretary, make me realize that this is a time in which our sailors' tradition to the environment is re-emerging. So with that sort of theme, what I'd like to do is to talk to you really about the specific connections between the way we move goods and the potential for improving public health. Okay. So first I'd like to begin with a set of numbers. 58 million containers. This is from a recent study that the Civic Exchange made available. It's a 2011 study. And this is the number of boxes of containerized cargoes that are moving through the Pearl River Delta each year. Now, this doesn't count for the energy and tankers and other sorts of cargoes, but it's a good number to start with. And when I saw that number, and knowing I come from the United States, I wanted to make some comparisons so that I could understand this region in context to regions I've worked in. So if I think about the Pearl River Delta as having a population of, say, 30 to 40 million people, I went and looked for regions in the United States that would also have 30 to 40 million people. You can see California there. But also the Northeast, which would be the states just north of where my university is. Or you could see the Mid-Atlantic, which is the states from my university south, but not including Florida. They would each have about 30 to 40 million people. Now the bubble sizes represent the relative amount of containers that are moved in those regions of 30 to 40 million people. And you can see that where I come from, we don't move in regions of 30 to 40 million people strong nearly as many goods as you do here. Now the Pearl River Delta is made up of a number of regions, Hong Kong being the one that here that we're talking about today. Hong Kong moves somewhere around, forgetting the number, 22, 25 million TEUs per year. And Shenzhen and Guangzhou are other very important regions, and there's other ones that are emerging. Those three red bubbles make up the 58 million TEUs number that I'm citing for you. And you can see now the numbers on the left that represent how many millions of people are in each of these regions. Well, the thing that I wanted to introduce here before I go into some detail on the public health relationships with goods movement is to simply say that the amount of energy it takes to move goods is proportional in many cases to the amount of goods that are being moved. It takes more energy to move more containers by the ships that are doing these jobs. And if you wanted to think about the emissions that would come from that energy use, until we take some measures, the emissions for a given fleet that occur from that combustion of that energy are proportional to the amount of goods that we move as well. The exposure to the public is a function of how much pollution they are exposed to, and that you can think of as being how close they are. At least it's one dimension of the risk, of how close they are. So in this graph, if you wanted to find a location where there would be important benefits from mitigating the emissions from moving goods, you would move along the bottom axis to the left, because areas with smaller areas with lots of people would have greater exposure. And then if you could find areas where there were more people, then that would also increase the risk. And so you can see from the graph that at least the areas I'm familiar with, this is a very unique and important area for us to consider the public health benefits of improving marine emissions. That's essentially the story I'm going to try to outline for you with some other scholarship and some details. But that's the relationship that we are trying to work on in the industry, in academia, and here in the region. This outlines essentially the talk that I could spend most of the day on, and I'd be happy to. But out of respect for the Secretary's time and in obedience to civic exchange, I won't do that. But the region, I'll outline what kind of information is available, and then I'll go through a few pieces of it. The region itself moves about 10 to 11% of global shipping, and again, it's this population is large in a fairly small area. The Civic Exchange says it's an area that's not that different than the San Francisco Bay Area. And the message I'm going to leave you with is that shipping can be an important part of the solution to the regional economic and public health well-being. If I walk around this circle, I can talk to you about why the region's important, and I think I've done enough of that. I can talk to you a little bit about this relationship between the amount of work done by shipping and the energy use and the emissions, and I'll briefly point to that, but I won't spend any time. And then I'll talk to you about some of the basis for our understanding of the relationship between exposure to emissions and air pollution and public health. I'll focus a little bit on the particulate matter portion of that, although there's NOx and ozone and a number of other things that could be studied as well. And then I'll talk a little bit about the way forward, looking forward. And I think at that point I should be able to wrap up and stay within my time. So the kinds of engines that move most of the goods that we move around the world, and most of the goods here in the region, in the Pearl River Delta region, are engines that don't have spark plugs. They're called diesel engines. Many of you already know this, but I appreciate if this is a repetition, but an engine that can burn any fuel without a spark plug is a diesel engine. And any fuel that can be burned in that kind of an engine is called a diesel fuel. However, there is no such thing as a single diesel fuel. The diesel fuel that is used by the largest of marine engines, engines that have a diameter of a single cylinder that's so big that I could crawl in to fix it, a meter in diameter, they can burn a diesel fuel that is known as a residual or heavy fuel, and it has high contents of sulfur, and it contributes to high particulate emissions, and it burns very nicely in a very advanced state-of-the-art diesel engine of a size like this. The fuel that's used by the public vessels, the government vessels, as Secretary Yao said, is also a diesel fuel, and it has a quality that you can see through it. It has a very low sulfur content, and it's very distilled, very clean. All of those are diesel fuels. It takes diesel, these diesel engines move these goods, and the amount of energy that they use is proportional to the amount of work that they do. These diesels typically are more fuel efficient than many other types of combustion systems we could use, and so they're chosen specifically for their heavy workloads, their ability to do the job very, very reliably, and their fuel economy. But they also are able then to contribute lots of particulate matter and other sorts of issues that matter as well. And we can look into the details. There's lots and lots of studies to do that, and I won't spend too much time not just noting that the engineers in the room and the scientists in the room, we can talk further, and anybody who's curious. Now, with regard to public particulate matter exposure and health risk, I want to outline for you that the public health understanding stands on the shoulders of quite a lot of medical and epidemiological research. And when I went to look at the basis for making a public health risk calculus, I went to find what the sources were, and I was pleased as a sailor to find that some of the earlier studies were studies of the health of seafarers that were operating vessels, and they followed them to see if they had a greater risk than the public to exposure to diesel pollution. And then I'll talk about other worker studies and then how we did our study. But with the seafarer studies, there's a way of tracking and doing the statistics on the longitudinal health and well-being of a population of people like the seafarers, like sailors, and compare that to the same longitudinal monitoring of the general public, people here. And when the studies followed the engine maintenance crews and engine room workers, they found that they had a 2 to 4 times greater risk of health impacts from exposure to the environments that diesel engine emissions change than the average public. The same kinds of studies were done on rail workers and truck workers and dock workers, and the main point of those studies is that the risk to workers is proportional to how long they spend exposed to pollution and how much pollution they're exposed to. With regard to the public, similar studies, similar methods, and more advanced studies have been done. And I'll just show you 2 points. Again, the room size is longer than it is wide, so I'll read these to you, and I appreciate if some of you can still read the details. But first is that the sulfur emissions specifically, along with moderate exercise, impact the lung function of children. And that's only one example of the kinds of impacts, health impacts, that children and adults can face from being exposed to the particulate matter specific to sulfur emissions. And down here with another source, the kinds of mechanisms of health impacts from PM 2.5, a small particle smaller than the width of a human hair that people can breathe deep into their lungs, include cardiovascular and pulmonary effects, heart and lung effects, including blood pressure and carcinogenics, etc. Now that health risk can be evaluated compared to the average population, and in all the studies that are currently being used, there is an increase in the health risk when the populations are exposed to particulate matter. Similar studies could show the same kinds of increased health risk for ozone, etc. We used some studies like that, and we created a health risk assessment for the overall exposure of shipping activity and world populations. Being a global study, it's a fairly coarse study, which means that studies that would be done in a region like here would likely sharpen the pencil and come up with more accurate numbers, but it is also true that those regional studies would likely come up with higher numbers because of the way the methodologies would, at the global scale, could underestimate. 2 things I want to add about shipping that maybe some people in the room know. About 85% of all world shipping is occurring north of the equator, and about 70% of world shipping is occurring within 400 kilometers of the shoreline. And 60 to 65% of the world's population lives in the world's shoreline regions. So we're looking at shipping that doesn't occur in the middle of nowhere doing something that we never see. They're serving commerce to our regions, and they serve commerce to the regions where the populations generate the goods or the markets where they're demanded. And so this map shows you where we placed the highest risk of public health impacts from a global study. And you can see here on the right that the Asian region in general is at fairly significant risk. That's a euphemism, I suppose. It's among the highest risk, along with a few spots in Northern Europe and 1 or 2 places in North America. And the ports that are served by ships are shown in these gray circles. They're all over. The shipping is all over. Now, the shipping doesn't work every single place that there's a dot. Shipping is concentrated where we live and where we work and where our goods are destined. And so I've drawn 3 circles, one being my home region in the North America region, one being the Mediterranean, and one being a circle generally over this region, very large part of this region. And the gray areas you can see are the increased concentrations of particulate matter from the shipping activities specifically. And you can see that we're all in that same band of increased exposure. Now there's a number of regional efforts that are going on. Just a quick check on time. Am I fine? How much time do I have left? 5 minutes? Okay. So I want to go very quickly to this and look toward the future. But what I think I'll do is for the public, and Christine, please stop me if you need to. I can turn the sound down or not. It's just music. You can keep it up. But this is from the Hong Kong Maritime Museum, and this simply shows to me part of the details of that big circle I showed you at the beginning. Seeing a big circle on a graph is useful, but looking at how much work is being done by ships of all sizes moving goods in and out of this region, Hong Kong and the whole Pearl River Delta, it's pretty dramatic to me. There's a few facts that show up in this video that I used in my getting familiar of the area, and you'll see some of those as well. Oops. You'll see how the wireless or wired connection continues here. I think what I'll do at this point, because it's suggesting to me I've spent enough time, is I will go ahead and move on. There's regional monitoring. There's something that I'm sure you'll hear about later called the Fair Winds Charter. The main point that I need to make for this is that fuel switching is recognized as one of the timely measures to improve performance. And there's an effort by some of the leading carriers here to demonstrate the benefits of that fuel switch ongoing now. And the main point again is that this region moves a lot of cargo, that the air quality is often poor enough to affect health, and that there's a relationship between the two, and ships can be part of the solution. Looking forward, and you'll hear about this really with the next talk for sure, and some others, there's a lot of wonderful work being done here that I had the honor to listen to in the last several days, to do better scientific monitoring, to improve control technologies, and to update operations. I would call fuel switching, some people would help me recategorize this, but fuel switching is an operational change. But there are a number of other technological changes, including shore power, etc., that may be talked about in your Q&As or other presentations. But really this area has an opportunity to help identify ways in which shipping can be one of the leading actors to help improve the public health to the region. But there's some challenges that occur there. The population and the goods movement in this region are expected to grow. In other words, the exposure to potential public health impacts is likely to be increasing, not decreasing, without action. Secondly, the kinds of targets that people have talked about in other parts of the world may have some merit in helping to improve the public health and environmental health from reducing pollution from shipping in this area. And thirdly, there's a lot of different ways that people are trying to think of to help improve the policy, help improve the behavior and technology choice for the shipping industry. This three-sided triangle simply uses a shorthand that I like for letting the economic signals regulate the level of environmental performance that we might call the invisible hand. The other is the firm hand, where we have policymakers create prohibitions or prescriptions for what needs to be done and what must be done, maybe timetables. And then the third is more of a guiding hand, where sometimes fees, maybe fee reductions for cleaner vessels, things like that can be used to help guide and accelerate the kinds of changes that may be needed. So with that, I will pause, and thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. It's a real honor.